Welcome to the Changemakers Podcast, brought to you by Graf-Martin Communications, where we discuss ministry, marketing, and leadership for good. I'm your host, Ellen Graf-Martin, and each episode you get to join me in conversation with some of the most interesting changemakers and groundbreakers from across Canada and beyond. Thank you for tuning in for this episode of the Changemakers Podcast. I'm so glad to have you here. Today, we have an interesting conversation with Andy Lubinsky. Andy is Vice President of Ministry Advancement at Bible League Canada. He is a changemaker in his work, and I have seen it firsthand. Andy is passionate about ministry, marketing, and what these things look like for the next generation. I have never met anyone who loves data and thinks through what it means as much as Andy. I have learned so much from him. Listen in as we discuss the value of humility, moving from corporate Canada to ministry, the importance of the accountability, collaboration, and innovation necessary for change, and the importance of mentorship and what Andy would say to himself 20 years ago. Let's jump in. Welcome, Andy. This is great.
Thank you. It's a great privilege.
We have gotten to work together since early 2017. And I have to say, even though you hired me as a consultant, I've learned a lot from you. And so that's why I'm so glad that you're here today, because I think people are going to really learn from this podcast, probably maybe more than any of the other ones that we've had. I think they're going to really learn. So I just want to know, tell us a little bit about your background, because it is a non-traditional background for people that we meet in ministry. Where have you worked? What have you done?
Well, I graduated from University of Toronto with an MBA and chose to do proceed through a business career. And I started off working with a number of organizations, starting with Procter & Gamble. I also worked with Campbell Soup Company and marketing, mostly in marketing areas. And then went to McDonald's as well, working in marketing, and was there for 13 years. I then decided to leave McDonald's and start my own consultancy, which I did for a number of years. It was interesting that my journey really started off in pure marketing. So I started off doing promotions, typical, label graphics, product development in the, sort of the canned goods industry, and then working to promotions like Monopoly at McDonald's.
Yes.
And so all of that sort of evolved. But I found, I guess it happened in McDonald's. I was familiar with marketing research, but I found that I really fell in love with marketing research there, and found that there were things that were actually measurable, and you could gather insights and actually make decisions based on that analysis. And so I ended up actually starting the marketing research and ultimately strategic planning function at McDonald's. So I ended my career there as the senior director of strategic planning. So it was always, as I say, there's a constant learning process. So the more I found out about research, the more it informed strategic planning. The more I found out about strategic planning, the more I realized it was about organizational development. And the more I realized that it was about organizational development, it really came down to people, and then it was about individual people. And that sort of led me back to, I've been a lifelong Christian, a cradle Christian, if you will. And it sort of took me like 25 years to sort of come back to, it really is about people. And if it's about people, it's about God. Mm-hmm. And that really ended up, I guess I'm a slow learner, but I found that really is the answer. And then it almost was providential that I was actually responding to a consulting opportunity at the time, and I ended up having a couple of long conversations with the folks at Bible League Canada, and started working on a consulting assignment. About 2 months in, they sort of came to me and said, "We got some good news and we got some bad news. The bad news is we can't afford to pay you anymore. The good news is, how would you like to work for us for a lot less?" And then, and so I prayed about it. I talked about it. I talked to my pastor about it, and I decided to join. And even then, my role was a little bit uncertain, but it evolved into what it is now.
And what is your role now?
Well, right now I'm technically the VP of Ministry Advancement, and I focus on essentially it's sort of what's happened is that He has prepared me through all my past experiences and given me certain skills and experiences and insights for whatever they're worth, and He has pretty much told me to apply these now. So I use what I've learned in whatever is required at Bible League Canada, and that covers strategic planning, it covers analytics, it covers marketing and fundraising and branding, and organizational development, so training and coaching and mentoring and things like that.
And one of the reasons why it has been so great to work with you is that you do have a really deep skill set in these different areas. And I think, one of the things that we've talked about is as a challenge in ministry is a lack of, this sounds really, really judgmental, but a lack of available talent in the marketing experience and skill and the ministry heart. So how do you get there? So because you have the marketing experience and the ministry heart. What makes you give up what can be a very lucrative career to pursue the ministry piece? Even you've got these great marketable skills that people would pay you a lot of money for. Yeah. And marketing for a ministry is not necessarily the most lucrative career. I want everyone to know that, but it really is meaningful. So,
well, I think one of the big motivations for me was that, this was ministry. This was actually bringing the gospel to people. That's what this was about. That's what I honestly think that as I look back at my career, I'm not sure, please don't take this the wrong way. I don't think I liked the trappings of business enough that it owned me. I was more interested in big ideas. And I guess and I say this because as I went through this evolution, it was always the next big idea that I wanted to learn more about. And so I was more interested in big ideas than in making money or having cars or anything like that, honestly, because when I found myself talking about how can we basically communicate the gospel to the unreached, that was about as motivating as I could get. That was the biggest idea I could think of spending time on. So, and then everything else that happened before was just tools. It's just application of tools. And those tools are neutral. I know there are some out there who think that marketing is the evil art and sales is just an abominable profession, but show me a really effective preacher and I'll show you a really skilled salesperson, okay? And I know it's all inspired, et cetera, but the tools of salesmanship still apply. The tools of marketing still apply. All marketing is a series of brand promises and trying to communicate what those are. And as we all know in marketing, you break a promise once, that's it. So it's a matter of, okay, what am I going to say about myself or my organization? What are people going to say about me, about us? And then how do I continue to fulfill that promise and make sure that their investment in that organization, in that brand, whether it's a product or a service or a ministry, is justified. And they can feel good about it. Because you know what? They say they're this and they are this consistently and they're reliable. Everybody knows that doesn't matter what circle you work in. Even as a consumer, you know that you're not going to go back to a brand that stops working.
And that is a good lesson from McDonald's. I actually think McDonald's is one of those brands that is reliable. Like when you order, it's actually a huge disappointment when you get your hamburger and it's not right. Yeah. Because that's not what that's not the McDonald's experience. So I think that corporate training has paid off really well. I know you probably are a reliable person, I think, by nature, but McDonald's probably just fostered that. Is that, can you have that corporate experience that? Yeah,
there's no doubt you learn lessons from, you learn lessons from wherever you go. And at McDonald's, they were a world-class organization. When I look back, I was very fortunate, very blessed to have spent time there. They had their challenges and and drama, etc. But like any organization, but I learned a great deal there. And the whole notion of the thing I take away from it was always bigger than burgers. It was always bigger than hamburgers. It was about people. They talked about how important teamwork was, which then I think there's obviously a gospel parallel to that whole notion. To lay down your life for your friends. I mean, that's how they lived that, okay? And that you always thought about your teammate first, which is what that gospel speaks to. And so that's important.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Cutting you up. I just see an interesting parallel. When you said it was always bigger than burgers.
Yeah.
So I think you and I mean, I've worked with a lot of different ministries and love them. And what the major project that we got to work on together for the Bible League was on building the Bible League brand,
right.
Bible League Canada brand. Right. And I think that there is a little bit, I'm going to go out on a limb, but I suspect that a lot of ministries have a block in the idea that kind of there's a bigger piece than could be Bibles. Like for the Bible League, it's bigger than Bibles, or it's bigger than insert the frame of reference for the ministry. Like it's bigger than child development projects, or it's bigger than this, or it's bigger than that, because it is about people. And when we drilled down together on the Bible League brand, that's actually where we landed, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And we hadn't had this conversation before, but we landed on that Canadian champion who really believes in equipping a local champion in a country around the world who is reaching people with the gospel. And this is a person who has been transformed. So we actually went bigger than Bible. So the name Bible League makes you think that our brand would be all about Bibles, and Bibles aren't in the brand, actually. Right. It's about the life transforming word of God. But it went to people, didn't it?
Well, ultimately, yes. And it really was about transformed lives. It's about I often think of our brand as there's pieces to a puzzle in the work that we do. The Bible is certainly a major piece, an essential piece. We could not do it without that piece. But we also have a training context of some kind, whether it's church planner training or adult Bible-based literacy or children's ministry. There's a training component that is fused with the Bible, and then we work with Indigenous leaders. So we're not a sending agency. We work with people who are on the ground, and they know how best to preach the gospel. They just need to be equipped. And all we do as an organization, quite frankly, is we put those pieces of the puzzle together, and the Holy Spirit does the rest. So, yeah.
It's bigger than Bible. It's like it's bigger than burgers, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that is actually what it makes it a compelling brand to me, is I think beyond the how. So I think, and I guess this is a good question for you. Have you seen this happen? I have, I think, that in ministry, we often get the how confused with the who we are or the why we do it. Is that fair? Have you seen that? Or we have a hard time remembering the real why. And we think that the how we do it, our method of doing it is our brand, but it's not necessarily, is it?
No. And sometimes we can also make the mistake of clinging to the how we do it and thinking, well, that's the model and that's what's worked and that's how we have it and that's our tradition or whatever. And we can easily trap ourselves by that and understand it's always good to go back to, why are we doing this? Every once in a while, it's good to have that sobering conversation with yourself, with your team, to say, what's our purpose? And then which then leads to, okay, so if that's our purpose, what's our vision? Okay? Where do we, and exactly what does the future look like if we were to fulfill this purpose? And then you can get into a discussion okay, so how are we going to go about that? And is our current system or process or structure designed for that? Okay? Which then one of the things I often say to my team is, every organization is perfectly designed for the results they are getting. Okay? So those of you who may be hockey fans, the Toronto Maple Leafs were perfectly designed to lose to the Boston Bruins twice.
Yes.
In the playoffs. They're perfectly designed for that. You may not like that result if you're a fan, but if you want to change it, you're going to have to change the design. And so that's why design is sort of a a placeholder for what you mentioned, the how, right? So you're going to have to look at, what do I change? And quite frankly, that's also the call of the gospel. I mean, I am who I am because of all kinds of things that God had nothing to do with. So if I'm going to listen to the gospel and actually be transformed, A, I have to listen, but B, I then have to ask myself, okay, what am I doing that is keeping me away from the fulfilling life that God wants for me? So it can be very humbling. And I think, I know that's an important feature of your organization is staying humble. And I honestly, I've actually read quite a bit on the value of humility. I'm rambling.
No, it's good. Go for it.
On the value of humility. But one writer said that his conclusion was that humble people are actually the easiest to work with because they don't cling to who they are. They're not out to, make a name for themselves. They always know that there's probably somebody out there who knows way more than I do. And my prayer is I wish I could meet them so that I could learn.
You are a learner.
And
you are really a learner.
Well, yeah. And I'm absolutely convinced that my suggestion to anyone who wants to grow their career is just never stop learning and always seek out people who might know more than you. I've just actually anecdotally, if I can veer from the sort of the ministry sphere, I was reading an article about Nick Nurse, the recent champion coach of the Toronto Raptors.
Okay, yeah.
And he had just won a championship. And so it's easy to sit back and say, whoa, well, I guess I've got this figured out. I know how to do this. But you know what he did in the off season? He went to, and sports people will know these names, he went and had a meeting with Bill Belichick, who is a legendary NFL coach who had repeated championship rings. And he went and he won, and he asked him, how do you repeat? Because he's done it once. How do you repeat? He didn't waste any time at all. He went and I'm going to go to somebody who knows more than me and build myself up that way. And that takes humility.
Oh, it takes huge humility.
Because you have to go cap in hand, knock on the door and say, can I just have a few minutes with you just to pick your brain? And I think most people they're willing to help if asked, and if depending on how they're asked, they're willing to help. And so I'd suggest to anyone who, if you want to grow yourself, just commit yourself to learning.
Oh, that's so good. That is so good. And I have heard you say you're perfectly designed for the results that you're getting.
Yeah.
A lot of times. And I think that's actually that's a massive challenge to nonprofit organizations, because I think that we are tempted to blame everything but ourselves when it's not working. It's because we can't get, if you're a sports team, you can't get the right players, don't have the right budget, people don't want to come to Canada, whatever those things are. Or if you're a nonprofit organization, Canadians are giving less, times are changing, millennials, everyone blames millennials for not giving. Yeah. There are all these external factors that it's so tempting to blame. Yeah. But sometimes part of the reason why this is the Changemakers podcast,
right,
and why we're actually even doing a podcast,
right, is
because I want to help organizations identify opportunity to change.
Yeah. Yeah.
and to help the next generation of leaders identify that they can be change makers too. And I think honestly that those two things go hand in hand, that some of the new leaders won't step into these organizations if they aren't willing to also say, okay, we also need to change. So to let new change makers in, you need to change. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Yes. You have to be ready for change. And I think you're also touching on the importance of accountability. Is to take on the fact that it's up to me to decide what I need to change and identify what I need to change. To do that prayerfully and with humility. It's really interesting. There was an author, business author, back in the 90s. Her name is Rosabeth Moss Cantor, who wrote. I'm sorry for all
that's
these.
That's good. We're going to have all these analogies in the show notes, so that's good.
Rosabeth Moss Cantor. She wrote a book the name of which escapes me, but if you just look her up, you'll find this. She did a study of sports teams, all levels, professional down to high school, and she distinguished between teams that had been extremely unsuccessful and teams that were extremely successful. So high school teams that had never lost a basketball game in like 5 years, and then high school teams that had never won a basketball game for 5 years, as an example. And her conclusion, she found 3 features, and one of them was accountability. The team that was winning all the time, if there was something wrong, if there was a mistake, if somebody so-called blew it, it was always, okay, that's on me. We did that. We did that. Now, how do we fix it? Okay. And the teams that were losing is always, well, the alumni don't support me. Well, the students just don't care. Well, the referees have it out for us. And there's always an excuse. There's always somebody else. And I thought that was pretty insightful. And I learned from that.
Remember the other 2 things? Accountability?
Collaboration. Okay, so the team that was winning all the time, if you wanted anything, they would give it to you. The ones that was losing is, well, that's sort of a secret document. I can't really share that. Okay, it was like, as an example, I'm just illustrating that sort of secrecy. And you can only have certain conversations with certain people and just cautiousness. Whereas collaborate, it's like, okay, let's get together. Let's share everything we know and find out what the best idea is, and let's problem solve moving forward.
That's a huge shared value between you and I. I know. I love collaboration, wise collaboration, and healthy collaboration, which is difficult and hard work.
Right.
And I know you do too.
It takes more time.
It takes way more time.
Yeah.
However, I think the results are extraordinary.
Yeah. And the third item was trying things out. Okay. So there were in the successful teams, what you witnessed was a practice where there were ideas that were still great ideas, and the team was dismantling them, like abandoning them, and say, we can do better. We can do better. Well, wait a sec, this works. No, we can do better. And there was constantly an encouragement to try things out.
That innovation.
And whereas the teams that were not so successful is, first of all, they never had permission to try things out. Oh, I wouldn't do that. The coach would really be upset about that if I tried that. That sort of spirit, if that makes sense. So,
and I think what you have just identified, those 3 things are gaps in a lot of organizations. Collaboration is tough because when we're looking at the donor dollar, as we know, it can be a real challenge to find organizations that want to collaborate because you're chasing the same donor dollar. It can be hard to find churches that want to collaborate because for some reason we have this mindset that the king, I don't know, that God's pockets are small. I don't know. And I know that it's much bigger than that, but it can be hard to find groups to collaborate with. And I know that that's a piece that you're active in at the Bible League as well. But the innovation, and you have challenged me on innovation as well. And I know you have a framework for innovation. So like it's more than brainstorming.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell us about that.
Okay. Just in summary form, it's a whole sort of system, if you will. And there are other systems out there that this is going to sound similar to, but what we typically call brainstorming, and I know we all enjoy it when someone says, okay, let's brainstorm, and we start throwing ideas around the table, and sometimes you get some good solutions, but what brainstorming really is, based on the analysis that I have read, it's really just stretching traditional thought patterns. So the way you always thought, all you're doing is stretching it a bit and maybe taking a baby step into a place where you may not have gone, but it's not really what I would call innovation. So innovation is designed, it's a very specific methodology where you ask questions that are designed to turn your thinking upside down. And I'll give you an example. Just to throw out a question in front of a group. Okay, we're going to spend the next hour listing with great enthusiasm all the things we would never do as a ministry. Never do. And list them and very seriously consider them. Now, none of those is going to be the answer or your innovative solution, but is where they lead to. Because you might find something that, well, it can't work this way, but it could work
if we did.
If you just tweaked it that way. But you never would have started there if all you were doing was stretching about all the things that we normally do. And they're reliable and they've stood us well. And now how do we stretch that? That's okay. there's a place for that, and there's some solutions that are good that way. But if you really want to be innovative, you have to turn your brain upside down, and it's a conscious effort, and it's uncomfortable, and it takes time. And it's hard. It's hard work.
It is hard work.
And you sometimes will go through, and I've seen this because I've participated in it, and I've seen this. You sometimes will go a couple of days in a session like this and think this is a complete waste of time. We're not getting anywhere. There's been no light bulbs going on, and you'll literally feel that way. And then you start getting breakthrough.
So good. And one of the innovative things that you're doing at the Bible League right now, which I just think is so cool. I think, so one of those things may be that what we would never do is take every single donor to the field.
Yep.
But you're rolling out a really innovative, interesting thing right now with these, because I didn't even know how to use them, these Google Glasses to do, tell us about that a little bit.
It's basically like virtual reality. Okay. So it's like you put these glasses on, there's steps to follow, and you're in India. And it's like
you can put your phone into the glasses and you can look around.
And you look around and it's like you're in India. Like you can almost touch them. It's like, if you can't take them there, well, let's bring them here.
Exactly. So you would never take every donor to the field, but what if
exactly
you could? And how could we do that? And so I think that is, you've really fostered this idea of innovation. And I know one of your greatest frustrations as we talk is how hard it is to be innovative in a ministry setting. And I think that's because we always have these barriers. I hear them all the time. We don't have a donor for that, or we don't have enough money for this, or we don't. But it's amazing what you can do with a bit of creativity. Yes. And Google Glasses that don't cost that much money, and all of these. And so I really applaud that. And because I think that what our ministry or nonprofit or marketing sphere needs right now, and this leadership area as well, is that innovation and people willing to be change makers.
Now, the thing about innovation also is it needs to be managed, because sometimes, especially in senior circles, people are afraid of innovation. Mm-hmm. In the corporate world, people are Wall Street does not they're afraid of innovation. Okay, if you want to get your stock downgraded, just start extolling innovative ideas. Okay, because they know that there's risk. And there is risk with innovation. So there's a couple things. There's a couple ways to manage it. Number one, it has to be controlled in the sense that you have to have a means by which to test these ideas out in a real world situation, whether that's focus groups, whether that's in small market tests or things that you can do online. So you have to have that way to control the risk, right? But then you also, back to the notion of trying things out, you also have to welcome people with ideas that may sound outrageous and listen to them. And I say to my staff, look, I will listen to anything. I don't care how crazy it is. I won't necessarily say yes to everything, but I'll listen to everything. So with that invitation and with a means of testing, you now then say, okay, so what innovative idea actually makes it to test? And just have some very simple criteria that says there's a rationale for it. State your assumptions clearly. Say, okay, I think this idea can work for these, and these reasons. Okay, sounds reasonable. Let's take it to a test and see if that's and verify the hypothesis. And then once it's tested, then the whole world opens up. If it tests successfully, and chances are it won't be 100% successful, but you'll learn from it, and you keep trying things. So my point is that there's ways to manage it prudently. So senior leaders shouldn't be afraid of it.
Oh, that's good.
Because there are parameters that you can install so that you're not sort of betting the farm on something unproven.
And I honestly think that we're touching on, in saying that, we're touching on a lot of things. One of the things that I think prohibits innovation is this an idea of stewardship. And I think sometimes what we call stewardship is actually fear. We are afraid of a donor being mad and phoning us and saying, why are you spending my money on this? So I think there's a little bit of stewardship that is actually fear. And I think that I think that we also are afraid of innovation because we don't have the skill sets. And going back to the beginning of our conversation, where it can be really hard to find the people with the skill sets to manage the innovation
Right.
and even implement it. So how do we, I guess, and we know that there's a gap. And if you could dream big and say, here's how I would fill that skill gap right now, how would you do it?
Well, I'll give you an example from our ministry. One of the things we concluded in analyzing our ministry was that we had some great content in terms of stories from the field. Outstanding. In fact, every agency that we ever worked with remarked on the quality of our content. Our growth rate was okay, but not where we wanted it to be. And so we thought about that and said, well, what's standing in our way? And we came to the conclusion that, you know what? We're just not telling the story as effectively as we might. And so what's the solution? Well, there's a number of solutions that you could entertain, but one of the things we resolved to pursue was we're going to learn. We're going to teach ourselves how to become outstanding storytellers. And if we have to overspend, and I can hear all the finance people say, what do you mean overspend? But if you have to prudently overspend on things that are going to make us better writers and better storytellers, then we should do that, because we got a huge asset here called great content that we're underutilizing. So on a strategic level, it makes sense to do that. And we've actually done that now for a couple of years. And we've encouraged, so the way to answer your question, if I'm answering it, how do you invest in it? Well, you find out what you need to get good at, and then spend the money and the time to get good at it. And not unlike Nick Nurse, go find the experts who know how to do it. I mean, one of the steps we've taken is we've identified ministries that are consistently, not just ministries, charities, period, of all stripes, that are growing consistently at double-digit rates. And let's find out why are they doing that? How are they doing that? And let's pick their brain. Again, go knock on their door in humility and say, listen, you're doing something that we don't think we know how to do. Can we talk to you?
And this is so different than an arrogant, we are better than everyone else. We are going to do it better than everyone else. And kind of digging a hole, which we've seen. I think this is very different. And I think part of the reason why you can authentically do this goes actually back to brand, because when we were doing brand with you, we talked about what makes you unique as an organization. And so I think you have a real firm grasp there about the call of the ministry and about the why. I think having your why really solid allows you to go and dig in on those other areas and say, it is worth growing this because we have a call that is so critical and that we're clear on. Yeah. We're clear on what we're called to do, so let's do it as best as we can. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I've seen from the organization.
Right. Yeah, and our ultimate why is because the world needs living. Why we do what we do is because the world needs a living word of God more than anything else, and we've seen that proven over and over and over again. And so that's our commitment. And now that we have that, it's okay. How can we use everything we've learned, all of our talent? Because God speaks to our talents as well, and He points to ways that we can become more effective, that we can redesign ourselves to achieve better results. And so the why is really important, as you say.
If there's someone who is listening who is working their way up in a career, has a career ladder and a financial goal in mind, and has a skill set, but may actually feel really compelled to get into a ministry role. I'm just thinking, we need some really good, talented marketing people. We need great marketers to do what we're doing and to be able to pursue the call, but they're conflicted. What would you say to them?
Okay.
What would you say to yourself 20 years ago?
Yeah, exactly. So it's really interesting. If you're conflicted, I think you have to spend some time, and only you can do this, spend some time deciding why you're conflicted. But in the conversations I have had, some of it has to do with, financial compensation. That's one of them. Okay. So you don't go into this sector to get rich, believe me.
No.
Though some naysayers might think that you do, but you don't at all. But there's that. But the other thing is, ask yourself what you're actually afraid of, and then I think what that might be is that you're not sure that you can be successful. I'll tell you something. I was just at a conference a while ago, and they had a really interesting exercise that, and this was like 300, there may have been 700 or 800 people in the room. And the speaker said, I'm going to put us through an exercise. Everybody had a piece of paper in front of them, and they write something down that you're most afraid of, that you're comfortable sharing. So everybody wrote something down. He said, okay, first of all, crumple it up and put it in a ball. And then hand your fear to someone else that you don't know. And so we did this for like 5 minutes. Everybody handed. And so then he says, all right. He started listing categories of fears, okay? And some of it were fairly innocuous, fear of heights, fear of, And then in each case, he asked those who, when they unraveled their piece of paper, is the fear that's in front of you about that? And each time people would stand up. So with each one, a few people would stand up, a few more people would stand up. So you had about maybe 10% of the room standing up after about the first 4 or 5 fears that they listed. And then he said, how many of you have the fear of failure in front of you? 3/4 of the room stood up. Fear of failure.
And these were ministry leaders.
These were ministry leaders. These were, I would say, mid to high level ministry leaders and fundraisers. Okay? Fear of failure. So that, to me, that spoke volumes. Is that you ultimately have to, and this is where it takes faith to make a leap like this. You ultimately have to surrender your life to God and say, Lord, I don't know where this is going. I think I have some talent that can be applied, but Lord, I'm gonna hang on to you, and then don't be afraid to just let go and let God lead it. He knows what your talents are. He knows how how they need to be deployed, and part of that fear may be that you'll quickly realize that whatever you learn in business is not just plug and play. The principles still apply, but they have to be reinterpreted, repositioned, and reapplied. So you can't just, okay, well, here's a promotion rule or a rule of promotion, and okay, make sure we do that. Well, it's not necessarily exactly like that.
It's about people.
It's got to take people into account, and you have to re-examine everything you learn, and that can be time-consuming and stressful, and maybe some people might be a little bit afraid of that. And, because there's lots of stories of people who try to make the transition and they fail. And the reason why they fail, honestly, in my opinion, is because they come with a certain way of doing things.
This is the way it's done.
It's the way it's done. I mean, there are epic stories of people who were award-winning salesmen, and at the end of their careers decide, well, I want to be a fundraiser. And they go in and they fail because they're applying pure sales, unrefined, raw sales skills into talking about a person's heart. And it's just such a different conversation.
We are doing marketing for good.
Yeah.
Right? Like that is our tagline here.
Yeah.
Is that it's marketing for good. Yeah. And it's for the kingdom and empowered by the Spirit and all of those things.
Right.
That I keep a scripture. I don't know if I've ever told you this. I keep a scripture on my whiteboard, and I have for years, and it is about the craftsman that God equipped to build the tabernacle. And it's about a guy named Bezalel that nobody talks about. Bezalel, son of Ur. And it says, look, he is a craftsman that was called. And then God says, look, I have equipped him with all the skills he needs to build this tabernacle. Yeah. And I think that if I was to say, like, what is the key? And I think it's to be a craftsman skilled and be open to the Spirit of God equipping you for the task that he's called you to. Is that fair to say?
I would say that's absolutely accurate.
I think that is such a key. So if you are one of those people listening, and I honestly think that that's a humility to be open, not just to other people telling you, but also to the Spirit of God through those people and in different ways. Like I sometimes have no idea how I know how to do my job. It doesn't make any sense to me in some ways, but I am pretty good at it, I think.
Well, yeah. So, and again, we all go through periods of our lives where we think, I don't even know. Am I even a Christian? Like you question everything, but that's okay. God knows that those conversations are happening. As long as you keep looking at Him for the answers will come.
It's good.
And this whole notion of fear of failure, if I can just come back to that for a second, in terms of a culture, building a culture, and innovation, one of the things you have to instill in people is to don't be afraid to fail. Okay. Now that doesn't mean, okay, good, we can just try anything. And
because it goes with accountability too.
Also, you still have to be accountable for it.
Yeah.
But just, you have to instill in your team and your teammates that, look, we'll try this. It may not work, but let's not be afraid. Let's give it everything we have. So,
and I know for our team, with our first core value that you identified of being humble and being honest, that is a measure of accountability there, is that we accept responsibility for our mistakes, that we can innovate and we can try, but we also have to accept responsibility and take learnings forward from what we try and doesn't work. So, this is so good. And so, Andy, you are a kind of a non-traditional leader in a nonprofit world. I don't know how you have survived in some of these meetings. I'm guessing you have gone a little bit crazy in some of them that you sit through, because they can be very non-strategic. Some of the when we sit through some of these, I'm not saying you and I have sat in the meetings, but I have sat in meetings where I think, okay, we really need some good marketing strategy here and just some strategy here. The other area that you really, really love, and when you come alive, you're talking about something that bores most of the population to death, and that is analytics. You love analytics. Yeah. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think, I guess I'm based on the personal assessments I've taken. I am wired for that, first of all. But I like it as a tool, because I think that they can answer a lot of questions that actually intuition, frankly, is not even equipped to answer. Okay, I think there's and my approach is to exhaust the analytics, right, and then let it go. What questions can it answer, and then let it go, and then turn to intuition. So if you look at these two sides of things, you definitely need intuition. You definitely need to consult and be aware of your emotions. Neurologically, you cannot make a decision without consulting your emotions. However, you also need objective information. And like I said, it's a tool. It's all it is information. So ask yourself, what can the analytics tell you? Okay. And then what is it not telling you? And then that's when you go to the other side and you look for qualitative information. You look for intuition. You consult your emotions. In the end, you always consult your emotions. How does this feel? And just be open to here I'm going to use numbers, 360-degree approach to investigation and problem solving, and don't turn down anything. So, it's.
And we need some good analytics people in nonprofit work, especially in Christian areas. I have seen that. I know even for us, I know we have tons of data and we don't maximize it because we are led by passion sometimes instead of being led by what we already actually know. Is that fair to say?
Well, yes. Or we're led. The way I like to think about it is, I've always felt, and I honestly think that God created us to be this way, is that we be reason-driven and emotionally sensitive, as opposed to the other way around. Sometimes we are emotionally driven, and then we try to rationalize our emotions.
And I can understand that.
Right.
I can identify with that.
And I think sometimes it's a good idea to say, okay, what is reason telling me first? And then, but I have to be sensitive. You can't just use the facts and beat people overhead with the facts. You have to also then be emotionally sensitive. What is it? How am I feeling about it? How will this make other people feel? Okay. And it's a real art to be able to communicate good thinking and good ideas and good recommendations with a sensitivity towards emotional reaction that will inevitably occur. People will tend to, it's just easier in the human condition to just go with what you feel. And yeah, and I think we can see the perils of that. All you have to do is look at some of the rants that occur in social media to realize they're so emotionally, there's just no reasoning going on there at all.
We miss logic sometimes in some of this.
And so
no, and I think that's important, and I think it is something for us to really be aware of, because the reality is that in the stories and the content that you get to have access to through Bible League and through what I get to have access through to the work we do with so many organizations, is that we are compelled emotionally because we not just see the plight of people around the world, and not just around the world, but in our own communities and across the country that we live in. But I think we care about them. Like, we care deeply about the work that we get to do, or you wouldn't do this work, we care so deeply that we can actually forget that we need reason as well. And we need to stop. Like, I've actually told clients before, I want you to stop doing that until we figure out, or stop creating content is actually something that I often tell people. Stop creating content until we figure out what content you already have. Yeah. And I think that's partly because we're so compelled to share the story that we want to tell it in 1,000 different ways.
Yes.
And we forget that 5 really great stories that stick with people are better than 1,000 stories that just fill our brains.
Right.
And so I think the reason, my mom always said to me, God gave you a brain for a reason. Yeah. I think that it is good for us to remember that.
Yeah. And I think also it's also biblical. It's God's character. There was one biblical critic who talked about the fact that his belief was that in the parts of the Bible where there's poetry, that was God expressing his emotions. And there were other parts when he talks about reason and law and things like that was his logic. So in the Song of Solomon, he you have a whole aspect of God's character there that you don't see in the instructions he gave to Noah to build the ark,
or in Leviticus,
or exactly. So we're sort of two-sided that way, and both of them are important, but to do one to the exclusion of the other is
it's so good. So good. And so, Andy, we could talk for hours. I know that we could talk for hours because we have talked for hours before. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, so you are a non-traditional person in this sector in many ways, but in one of the ways, not just that you are Ukrainian. I appreciate that.
That's pretty unique.
I totally get that because of my dad's background. However, I think the other really interesting thing to me is that you are Catholic. And we don't see, I have a deep appreciation personally for this because I was raised by a mother who was raised Catholic. And so I have such a deep appreciation, and I learned to love the Spirit of God because of my mother's example, which people wouldn't necessarily associate with being Catholic.
Yeah.
But I think there's something we can learn. And I'll tell you one of the other reasons why I want to touch on this, because normally I wouldn't pull out someone's denominational affiliation in a podcast. But I think a reason I want to talk about this is because a few years ago, I was really convicted that I had worked in a primarily evangelical world. And the reality is the church in Canada is small, and we need each other. And I realized that when we were hosting events, we were so exclusive. We were inviting our evangelical brothers and sisters and considering them family. Yeah. And I don't know what it was that totally changed. We had a Catholic chaplain come in and talk to our team and do a lunch and learn. And I realized that I was calling our Catholic brothers and sisters our Catholic friends. And I actually used that word. I said, I said to our team, we have to start remembering our Catholic friends. And then I realized what a jerk I was because I was saying our Catholic friends and not our Catholic brothers and sisters. And I was actually leaving them out of the I was discounting them as part of the family, which is not okay. And so that actually changed things in a huge way for us as an agency, where we've been very intentional about saying we are for the family of God. So we include our Catholic brothers and sisters and our Orthodox brothers and sisters as much as our Pentecostal or Presbyterian. And so I just want to say that I'm so glad that you are in the role that you're in. But I also want to ask you, how does it feel to be one of those brothers who has potentially been discounted and maybe not even thought, maybe you don't realize that. Did you even know that people felt that way?
No, I'm quite aware of it, actually. And first of all, let me say this, that I think that, again, being a learner, I think that my exposure and my in-depth exposure to Protestant theology and what is commonly called evangelical theology has only been enriching to me. I mean, I've just learned so much. And I would also say that there is some people think we're miles apart. I honestly don't think. I think we're inches, maybe feet. It's not miles. It just isn't. There's so much that we share in terms of our theology and our belief system. And so let me.
Because you love the gospel, right?
I love the gospel.
You love Jesus.
It's all about Jesus. It's always what it's ever been. It's all about loving Jesus and Jesus at the center. And I don't care what the denomination is. One of my favorite verses, and I think about it often, is when Jesus says to Peter, "Who do you say that I am?" And he says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." I think that just about any denomination that is Bible believing and Jesus believing would agree with that. And as long as we're all saying that, that puts us on the same team. Everything else, there may be ritualistic things, there may be things that are, and we emphasize different things, but we're essentially all on the same team. So let me go back to—
We're in the same family.
We're in the same family, yeah. And first of all, there is value in the various denominations. There are some people who think, and even in Catholic circles, who think, well, they're wrong and we've got it right. And I think that is probably a kind of narrative you hear in a number of denominations. My personal view, and again, it comes from, I've learned so much, I think that the different denominations, they focus on certain aspects of the gospel, and they become really, really good at that aspect. Okay, so for example, the Baptists, they totally get the whole notion of being born again, and what that means, and how you should do that. And they can predict for you exactly the whole path in great detail about what being born again is all about. I'm not sure the Catholics really understand that as well. The Pentecostals, they totally understand the whole notion of the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, the belief in miracles, and that they can happen anytime, and that the Spirit of God is living and alive, and all of this. I mean, I sit at the feet of those two groups, and this is great. I'm learning.
Awesome.
I'm getting to learn more.
Yep.
And I also think that in terms of, you talked about the difference between evangelicals and Catholics. Sometimes we don't use those words interchangeably. We think, well, if you're evangelical, you can't be Catholic. Or if you're Catholic, you can't be evangelical. I know the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada did some research that showed that if you look at straight numbers, percentage-wise, this isn't true, but in straight numbers, there are slightly more Catholics who fit the definition in terms of behaviors and belief systems of being evangelical than the Protestant evangelical world. Okay,
That's crazy.
Yeah, which
Wow.
is, but
You're going to blow people's minds.
It's a small margin, but it's not what you would think. Now, percentage-wise, there's absolutely no doubt that there are a ton of nominal and cultural Catholics who, quite frankly, they just go through the motions. They're Christmas and Easter Catholics, funerals and weddings, and First Communions and confirmation. They're all there for the big things, but everyday Sunday attendance or Bible reading, it's just not happening. I mean, so percentage-wise, there are more Catholics who actually would not be confused with being
but
evangelical.
numbers-wise, more, I do air quotes, evangelical Catholics.
And
it's amazing. That's EFC data. We'll look for the study and try to link it in the show notes.
And if you look at the traditional evangelical churches, it's a much higher percentage they're devoted. Okay, so in terms of devotional levels, we have bottom line is we have a lot to learn from each other.
We really do.
And I find that It's really interesting, though. When I was in Ukraine, I did a chance to help the Ukrainians there, help teach them a little bit about strategic planning. And so I introduced myself and gave my testimony. And it was really fascinating because it was a Protestant evangelical group, very evangelical. It was I have great memories of the inspirations I got from them. So I was so grateful for being there. But anyways, I started off telling them about my testimony, and then I said I was Catholic. And you could see their faces drop. It's almost like, okay, we just shut this guy down. And then I said, I'm Catholic, but, they're so messed up, I can't bear to leave them.
I think we all have a family like that, right?
And then it was like
the family dynamic.
What happened was their faces went up, and then they went like sort of like this, like,
confused.
oh, that could be us too. Like,
yeah, that's all of us. That is all of us.
Yeah. So, anyways, I sort of won them over that way. But like, I honestly believe you can't. Someone once, way smarter than me, once said, don't look for the perfect church because you'll just ruin it. Okay? And I just believe that bloom where you're planted. There is so much in Catholicism I haven't even read, that the catechism is like this thick. I don't know who other than the priests have actually read it cover to cover. And I keep finding new information in it. So
there's probably that in every church tradition, is that we have. And so I think, and the point I want to make is I think that going forward in Canada, and I said this, one of the reasons I am passionate about this and about being an ecumenical church is that we are small in Canada as a church, and we need each other. And I think that honestly, one of the change-making things that we're going to see as we move forward, and not just we're going to see, I think we are seeing it, is that younger generations are not necessarily, and I think this is something that nonprofit organizations, denominations, churches are all grappling with, is that younger Canadians are not as concerned about denomination as I was raised to be originally. And I mean, now I've actually attended Catholic, Lutheran, Southern Baptist, Pentecostal, Brethren in Christ, across the board, some Missionary Alliance. So like I've actually been part of these churches, and I, like you, I say, you know what? They're all really good at different things. And what I see is that we all really need each other. And we need the part of that humility that we were talking about is saying, I want to learn from you. I may not necessarily agree with everything that you believe because God's leading me in the way he's leading me, but I can learn from you, and we are family at the table. And I have said this to some people, there's always a weird uncle at the table. You might be it. If you don't know who it is, might be you. But at the table is big. And I think that's a huge part of our change making moving forward. So
that's very well said. Very well said. And I think that, I don't know that we have the luxury to work separately the way we used to. I mean, just the pure, if I can be analytical here, the pure economics of it are going to eventually show us that we can't afford to do some of the things we always used to, and we have to work together. We have to work together. And that working together doesn't necessarily mean uniformity. It can be unity without being uniform.
That's good.
We can still have our differences. That's okay. Just like families, they have different practices, but we can still be friends as families. We can still have a group of families come together for a nice pierogi dinner, Ukrainian pierogi dinner.
I love it if they're good pierogies.
And have
Christmas Eve dinner for
great
us.
time, and love each other, and it can.
Oh, it's good.
It can all work.
And I get that, because our Christmas Eve dinner was pierogies growing up. So homemade vareniki. They weren't pierogies, they were vareniki.
Vareniki,
Andy, it is so good to have you here, and I'm really, really glad that you've been able to share so much. I think this has been rich conversation. We're gonna have a lot to remark in the show notes, so people can check out the show notes if you want to reference back to any of those books or things that Andy was talking about. I hope we get to have you back. I know we're working on a couple different things that are percolating in the background around data and the Canadian church and ministry. And so stay tuned for more on that. because I'm really hopeful that I get to work with Andy and his brain and his heart on that project as well. But I'm so glad that you were here, and we have so much to learn. Oh, because we didn't even get to talk about succession and mentoring and what you're learning now, because you've gone back to university. Okay, you've gone back to school.
Yeah, that's correct.
And some people would say, Andy, you can get better at your golf game at this stage in your career. You don't have to go back to school. You went back to school?
Yeah, I'm taking a Master's of Theological Studies. And I can only deal with one course at a time. But that's what I'm on my third course now.
I love it. So you're doing that. Yeah. You're also, I want to actually do a panel discussion on next generation and succession and mentoring. And so we're going to just have to have you back because we would talk for another hour on that. So
great.
I'm so excited. I'm so glad you were here today. Thanks so much, Andy.
I appreciate the time. Thank you. It's been a great privilege. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Changemakers Podcast, brought to you by Graf-Martin Communications, your marketing team for good. Graf-Martin Communications is Canada's leading PR and marketing agency serving faith-based organizations from coast to coast. Visit grafmartin.com to learn more.